Well, our scriptures today from Genesis and Matthew seem to have something in common. Both the disciples and also Abram were simply commanded to go. And it kind of reminded me of that phrase that you hear, from parents sometimes, because I said so. How many people here have ever said that?
Or heard it.
Yeah, how many people heard it? More, okay, yes. Because the parenting magazines tell you you're not supposed to use that. But I'm sure many of us know that you can get to that point where that's all you can say. It establishes that clear line of authority, me parent, you child, in the same way that I think God was doing, me God, you people. Now, when Abram set on his journey, it was simply because God had said so. There was no explanation given, no reason why he should be chosen. His father, Terah, was a worshiper of a moon god, and it's likely that Abram also was. Up till now, the history of the human race has been one big disaster after another. It started with Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and then their son Cain murders their other son Abel. Then God has to wipe out everybody with a big flood, and now, just before God speaks to Abram, we have the story of the Tower of Babel. And I think it's important to include that because it's about human beings trying to become gods. They build a great city, and then they build a big tower in it which will reach up to the heavens. And they want to make a name for themselves so that everybody will know who they are and all people will be gathered to them. Well, God has a different plan. God scatters all the people and confuses their language and wants to start over again. And this time God chooses a single man. He chooses Abram. And God promises him land, a great nation, and a great name, and the authority to bless and curse. Isn't this all the things that the people of Babel wanted? But they wanted it themselves. It is God's gift to Abram. And Abram is going to be the means of the blessing of all the families of the earth. This is different. This is different from God saying, I am your God, and them saying, yes, God is our tribal God. God is our national God. No, this time God is saying, and all the families of the earth. That had to be a real game changer for Abraham. That must have really set his mind on a different course. Abraham is also called the father in the faith. And that is because from Abraham, as he later becomes known, we have Christianity, Judaism, and Islam that all revere Abraham in some way or another. When Abram began his journey, he had nowhere in mind that he was going. God hadn't told him anything. So he leaves behind his family connections, his home, and his land. He's told not to take any of his kindred. But that just seems to be regarding his extended family, because he certainly takes his wife and also his nephew, whose father has died, so Abram is looking after Lot. Now, it sounds like there were just 3 people going, but in truth, it was probably a very large encampment that went. All the persons that they had acquired. Well, how do you acquire persons? You do it by buying them. So there were a large number of slaves that went with them. And we know that Lot was a very rich man. He had gold and silver. Probably took some of that. Was going to need it for this long journey. And they took all of their herds and flocks. So many that when they got to Canaan, they decided they had to split up because they had too much. So Lot had to go to one side, Abram to the other. Now, this is a big disruption to Abram's life, and I'm wondering if any of you have experienced God disrupting your life. When you think there's something that you ought to do, and then somehow you're told not to do it. Or it could be the other way around. You haven't thought of something and suddenly God says, here, this is what you're going to do. You know, they say if you want to make God laugh, have a plan. Now, I can tell you that my call to enter ministry, formal ministry, came unexpectedly. I had been doing work as a lay minister. I was working as a chaplain. No, that came later. But I had like one toe in the water, you know. I was taking a course at night, maybe two. And, you know, that was sort of my way to sort of, do I really want to do this, you know, commit 3 years of my life to doing these studies? And so I was sort of testing it out. And then I lost my job. And we had just bought a house. So it was at the worst possible time. But that's when we both discerned that it was time for me to enter studies full-time. So I went and signed up at Emmanuel College for full-time courses, and it worked out. We're fine. We're here, you know. I mean, we didn't starve. We didn't, not have a roof over our heads. And, you know, I really believe God was taking care of us. So even though I thought it was the worst time, for God, it was the perfect time. And so sometimes it takes a leap of faith when you think you're being called to something and you think, that's impossible, I can't do that, you know. And it might not be a huge thing. It might be somebody saying, I think you should join the choir. And someone says, I can't sing, but you've been asked, so obviously there's some reason that you've been asked, so try it. Or you might just be called to do a simple thing, you know. It could be decorating the church. It could be taking care of the sign outside. It could be anything. And not just in these walls or on this property, but way beyond. And I know that we're very faithful in our collection of food, for example. So we just need to be aware of what the needs are around us and what God might be calling us to do. Now, sometimes in life, you also experience a disruption in your family traditions, and you might even have to leave some of them behind. During COVID, many people were not able to celebrate with their loved ones. That was difficult. But now that we are nearing the end of the pandemic, people are gathering again. But some people have found new ways to define and create family. And that is going to continue. Now, if God said you have to leave all your possessions behind, you know, just what you can carry with you, what would you take with you? Assuming you can take your family. This is things, possessions. I know for me, one would be my cell phone. Secondly, my computer, or at least a tablet. But of course, we don't know that that's going to be functional anyways. So, yeah. Now, let me tell you something about when homeless people go into a shelter. They are allowed to bring 2 plastic bags, like grocery bags, in with them. And sometimes they've had all of their stuff stored somewhere, but they need to go into the shelter for some reason, their health or something happening. And suddenly they have to put all of their life's belongings in these 2 bags. Well, it's kind of similar to Abram's journey. He had to leave what was familiar behind, and in a sense, Abram became homeless for that period of time. Now, I know many people who are homeless have had to make that choice of what to leave behind, what they can take with them. And the things that are most precious to them are pictures of family, because that keeps that faint hope alive that they might be able to be in their lives again. And identification. You know, just as the people of Babel looked for a name and God said that he would give Abram a name, having an identification is very important. And it's especially important to people who are homeless because without identification, you can't get housing, you can't get an income, you can't get access to medical care, all those things. So I worked very hard at getting people identification when I worked with the homeless population. And yet to get identification, you need one other piece of identification. Well, what kind of identification can you get? And then we found out that people could get library cards. And on the library card, you could get the shelter's address put on it. And so suddenly they had a piece of ID. And then they could go and get their social insurance number and their all that stuff based on the library card. That lasted for a while, and then they were told that they couldn't do it anymore. But that's how desperate people can be to establish their identity. Another thing people did in the homeless population, if they'd been in the hospital and they got one of those wristbands with their names on it, they'd keep that on. Even then, when it ended up looking really worn and like, why are you keeping that? Because it had their name on it. And a lot of people said they were really afraid that if they died on the street, nobody would know who they were. And so they kept their identity that way. And I know another woman, and she was homeless, and she'd set up her shelter in an alley. And she was told that they were going to come and take all her things away, that she was going to be removed and all of her belongings. She made a curious choice. She decided to set them on fire, to literally burn down her home, because she didn't want her possessions to fall into the hands of other people, because then she'd never get them again. Now, of course, she did get charged with arson, and I met her when she eventually ended up in the women's jail. I kind of admired her, I have to admit. It was kind of like a sort of, I'm not letting the world tell me who I am. But I can't advocate for arson, though. I did participate in an exercise once, and we were making our family trees. At first, this seemed kind of a happy thing. Okay, yeah, I can put this person in, that person in. And then you went back a generation, and then another generation, and another generation. When we got to the 5th generation, most of us couldn't remember, didn't know who those people were. And the facilitator of this presentation said, okay, in 5 generations, nobody will know that you existed. Wow. That is a sobering thought for sure. But it's also very humbling. And I think the flip side of this is that life is so precious that we need to make the most of it while we're here. We are the end result of millions of years of evolution, from the stars to the primeval bogs. We could have been a tree or a fish. DNA is not that different among living things, but we are human beings. So let's be the kind of beings that happen to be human. How are we being human? It's somewhat fashionable these days to have your ancestry traced through your DNA. And people are often astonished at the results. And I'm not surprised, because I do believe that somehow, way back somewhere, we all come from different places, and we can all trace ourselves to places we wouldn't even think of. And that means that all of us are probably interrelated. And I think that was part of the message of Jesus, that we are all family. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has 11 disciples. It's after the resurrection. This is one of his, it is his final appearance to the disciples in the Gospel of Matthew. And so there's only 11. Judas is gone. And Jesus talks to them and commands them, but he has gathered them as a family. This has been his chosen family for 3 years. These are the people who became his brothers, his friends, the people that he relied on. And so they are the ones to receive this commission. And in this crowd, there are both believers and doubters. I like that because it means that the doubters have a place too. They are also included in this family. They are included in this commandment that Jesus gives. It is for all people. It doesn't matter if you're a believer or not. Now, these two verses that were read, they are cram-packed with enough information to keep a team of theologians busy for years and years. And when you break it down, the first words you hear are go, therefore. Just go. Isn't that like what Abram was told? Leave your families behind. Just go where I tell you. Because I said so. And now the next phrase, make disciples of all the nations. Well, I've got to tell you that kind of makes me a little uncomfortable. The word make disciples, because the church has not had a great tradition. Sometimes we've been part of colonialism and gone in and made disciples. And that isn't always a question of choice. It certainly wasn't for the residential school children. It was not their choice to go and have them be made disciples. But if you dig a little deeper, the words that were used for make disciples is in the Greek, mathetes, and it means be disciples to all the nations. I think that is something I'm more comfortable with. Yes, be a disciple. Let the nations see what being a disciple means. And it certainly means to heal, teach, pray, and baptize everyone, no matter where they came from, because there's only one family, the human family. This is what Jesus commanded them. Take that leap of faith, and you will land right where God wants you to be. And you'll never be alone. Let's say that again, because I think it's so important. You'll never be alone. Because Jesus promised to be with us for all eternity. That certainly is good news for today and for all of our tomorrows and our tomorrows. Thanks be to God. Amen.